The first gunshot cracked through the howling Montana winter like thunder, sending a flock of startled crows into the gray December sky of 1878. Georgiana Parker's hands trembled as she aimed the Winchester at the hulking shadow forcing its way through her barn door. 6 months a widow, and now this a mountain of a man breaking into her property during the worst blizzard in 20 years. "Take one more step, and I swear I'll shoot you dead where you stand," Georgiana called out, her voice steadier than her grip on the rifle. The frigid air burned her lungs as she stood her ground, skirts whipping around her ankles in the wind that howled through the open barn door. The intruder paused, slowly raising his hands. "Madam, I mean no harm." His voice was deep, graveled by the cold. "My horse is injured. We'll both freeze to death out there." Georgiana's finger hovered over the trigger as the man stepped fully into the lantern light. Snowflakes clung to his beard and the fur-lined coat that stretched across impossibly broad shoulders. Behind him, she could make out the silhouette of a limping horse, its breath forming clouds in the bitter air. "Please," he added, those piercing blue eyes meeting hers from beneath the brim of a snow-covered hat. "I can pay." Georgiana hesitated, the gun suddenly heavy in her hands. The blizzard outside was merciless, the kind that buried men alive and froze cattle where they stood. Even an outlaw didn't deserve such a death. But the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and she was alone. She'd been alone since Thomas died. "Your weapons," she said finally. "All of them." "On the ground. Now." The stranger nodded, slowly removing a revolver from his holster and a knife from his belt, placing them on the straw-covered floor. "Name's Quinn Blackwood. I was heading to Virginia City when the storm hit." Georgiana didn't lower her rifle. "Get your horse inside and close that door. This storm's bringing wolves down from the mountains." Relief crossed the man's weathered face as he turned to lead his limping mount inside. The animal was a magnificent Appaloosa, though clearly in pain, with a deep gash on its right foreleg. "You can stay until the storm passes," Georgiana said, watching as he secured the barn door against the howling wind. "Not a moment longer." Quinn Blackwood nodded, removing his gloves to tend to his horse. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. Georgiana Parker." She kept the rifle trained on him. "And don't thank me yet. Dawn comes, and you ride out injured horse or not." Little did Georgiana know that the blizzard would last for 3 days, and that the mountain man forced into her barn would change everything she thought she knew about survival, trust, and her own frozen heart. The night wore on, with the wind screaming like a wounded animal around the corners of the barn. Georgiana kept her distance, perched on a hay bale near the door, rifle across her lap. Quinn worked diligently, cleaning his horse's wound with supplies from his saddlebag. "She'll need stitches," he said finally, glancing up at Georgiana. "You wouldn't happen to have any thread, needle?" Georgiana hesitated. Helping meant getting closer, trusting more than she wanted to. "In the house. But I'm not leaving you alone in my barn." "I understand your caution, Mrs. Parker, but I give you my word I'm just a trapper caught in a storm." His eyes met hers, steady and calm. "My horse needs help." Something in his gaze and honesty she hadn't expected made Georgiana sigh. "We'll both go. You can wait on the porch while I fetch what you need." The journey from barn to house was brutal. The 50 yards between buildings transformed into a gauntlet of driving snow and wind that cut through clothing like knives. Quinn insisted on breaking trail, his broad back shielding Georgiana from the worst of the gale. By the time they reached the porch, her face burned with cold. "Wait here," she ordered, slipping inside to gather needle, thread, and lantern. When she returned, she found him respectfully standing exactly where she'd left him, snow gathering on his shoulders, not even testing the door handle. It was a small thing, but it eased something in her chest. Back in the relative warmth of the barn, Quinn worked with surprising dexterity for hands so large, stitching the gash on his horse's leg with careful precision. "You've done that before," Georgiana observed, the rifle now resting beside her rather than aimed at him. "Many times. Man can't survive in the mountains without knowing how to mend what's broken." He tied off the thread and stroked the mare's neck. "Had to stitch myself up more than once, too." "You live in the mountains?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her caution. Quinn nodded, settling onto a hay bale across from her. "Cabin up in the Bitterroots. Trap during winter, guide hunters in summer. Been doing it 15 years now. Alone." A shadow crossed his face. "Not always, but these past 5 years, yes." Something in his tone silenced further questions. They sat in the lantern-lit barn, listening to the storm rage outside, two strangers with secrets they weren't ready to share. When Georgiana's eyelids began to droop, Quinn spoke softly. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Parker. I'll keep watch," she snorted. "So you can rob me blind." His expression didn't change. "So the fire doesn't go out. Cold like this will kill faster than any bullet." Georgiana wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her. The small potbelly stove in the corner of the barn provided just enough heat to keep them from freezing, but it needed constant attention. 2-hour shifts, she conceded, "and I'll take first watch." Quinn didn't argue, just arranged his bedroll at a respectful distance and lay down, hat over his face. Within minutes, his breathing deepened. Georgiana watched him, wondering about the life that had carved such deep lines around his eyes. He was older than her, perhaps 40 to her 32, with a face weathered by sun and wind and time. Not handsome in the conventional way Thomas had been, but striking a man shaped by wilderness rather than society. 2 hours later, when she woke him for his shift, their fingers brushed as she handed him the rifle. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, a reminder of how long it had been since she'd touched another human being. "Sleep well, Mrs. Parker," Quinn said quietly, moving to tend the fire. Georgiana turned away, curling into her blankets, unsettled by her reaction to this stranger who had forced his way into more than just her barn. Morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, it had intensified, the world outside reduced to a howling whiteness that made the barn seem like the last refuge on earth. "We need to check on your livestock," Quinn said, after they'd shared a breakfast of hardtack and jerky from his supplies. Georgiana looked up sharply. "We? This cold could kill your animals if the water's frozen. 2 work faster than 1. He was already pulling on his coat. "Unless you'd rather I stay put while you do it alone." The practicality of his offer warred with her instinct to keep him at arm's length. But he was right, the cattle and chickens needed tending, and the tasks would take hours in these conditions. "Fine," she relented, "but I'm watching you." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't expect otherwise, Mrs. Parker." Working together, they managed to break ice from troughs, distribute feed, and ensure the livestock were as comfortable as possible. Quinn worked tirelessly, his strength making quick work of tasks that would have left Georgiana exhausted. When they returned to the barn, snow caked on their clothes and eyelashes, Georgiana found herself wondering how she would have managed alone. The thought was uncomfortable. She'd prided herself on her independence since Thomas's death. "Your farm," Quinn said, warming his hands by the stove. "You run it alone," Georgiana stiffened. "Yes. That's a lot for one person." "I manage." Her tone closed the subject. But as the day wore on and they worked side by side to repair a leak in the barn roof, Georgiana found herself speaking again. "My husband died last spring. Fever took him in 3 days." The words felt strange in her mouth, having gone so long unspoken. We came out here from Philadelphia 5 years ago. His dream, not mine. Quinn nodded, hammering a board into place. Frontiers hard on dreams. Yes, well, Thomas had many of them. She passed him another nail. He was going to build an empire, make us rich with cattle. Now I'm just trying to survive until spring when my brother can come take me back east. You're leaving. Something like surprise colored Quinn's voice. Of course. What's here for me but struggle and loneliness? The bitterness in her tone surprised even her. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. The mountains get in your blood. Some folks can't leave even when they should. Is that why you stay? The mountains in your blood? His eyes met hers, blue as a summer sky against the darkness of his beard. Something like that. By evening, the storm showed no signs of abating. After a simple supper cooked over the stove, they sat in what had become a surprisingly comfortable silence. You should sleep in the house tonight, Quinn said suddenly. Barn's no place for a lady. Georgiana raised an eyebrow. And leave you unattended. I gave you my word I mean no harm. Lock your door if it eases your mind. She studied him, this mountain man who'd handled her livestock with gentle hands and repaired her barn roof without being asked. And if the fire goes out, or your horse needs attention, I'll manage. The wind howled particularly fiercely, rattling the barn doors. The prospect of her cold, empty house made Georgiana shiver. No, she decided. I'll stay. Someone needs to make sure you don't freeze to death. She tried to make it sound practical rather than admit she'd grown accustomed to his quiet company. Quinn looked like he might argue, then nodded. As you wish, Mrs. Parker. That night, as they lay in their separate bedrolls listening to the storm, Georgiana found herself speaking into the darkness. What did you mean earlier, about not always being alone in the mountains? The silence stretched so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, his deep voice came from across the barn. Had a wife once, Sarah, and a daughter, Emma. The words were measured, careful. They died in '73, influenza. Georgiana's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Been a long time now. Does it get easier? She asked, the question she'd been afraid to ask anyone since Thomas died. Another long pause. Not easier. Different. The grief changes shape, becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you. His words settled over her like a blanket, more comforting than any platitudes she'd received from well-meaning neighbors or the pastor's wife. Thank you, she whispered, not sure if he could hear her, for your honesty. No response came, but somehow, Georgiana slept better that night than she had in months. The second day of the blizzard found them falling into an unexpected rhythm. They tended the animals together, Quinn splitting firewood while Georgiana prepared a more substantial meal from her house stores. The tension between them had eased, replaced by the camaraderie of two people facing a common enemy in the relentless winter. You're handy with that axe, Georgiana observed as Quinn stacked split logs inside the barn door. Wood's life in the mountains. No wood, no fire. No fire, no life, she finished for him. Same here on the plains. He glanced at her, something like approval in his eyes. You've learned well for an Easterner. Necessity is an effective teacher. She stirred the pot of beans hanging over the stove, though I never imagined I'd end up here. What did you imagine? Quinn asked, setting aside the axe and warming his hands. Georgiana paused, trying to remember the dreams of her younger self. Books, music, perhaps teaching. I was educated, you know, before I became a farmer's wife. I can tell. At her questioning look, he elaborated. The way you speak, the books I saw in your house, not typical frontier fare. And what would a mountain man know about literature? The question held no malice, only curiosity. To her surprise, Quinn smiled slightly. I wasn't born in buckskins, Mrs. Parker. My father was a professor at Columbia College. I had my fill of Shakespeare and Milton before I headed west. Georgiana stared at him, reassessing. What brought you to the wilderness? War, he said simply. Fought 4 years for the Union. Afterwards, cities felt confining. Too many people, too many memories. She nodded, understanding better than she would have expected. After Thomas died, every condolence, every pitying look had felt like sandpaper on raw skin. Sometimes silence was the only bearable companion. The beans are ready, she said, changing the subject. They ate together, the howling of the wind making their small circle of warmth feel all the more precious. Quinn told stories of his trapping days, of encounters with bears and mountain lions that made Georgiana's eyes widen. In return, she shared tales of her first disastrous attempts at homesteading, the time she tried to milk a cow from the wrong side. The bread that had been so hard Thomas had joked about using it to repair the roof. Laughter came easier than it should have with a stranger. But perhaps that was the gift of the storm, this suspended time outside normal rules, where two lonely people could find momentary companionship. You mentioned your brother is coming for you in spring, Quinn said as they washed their tin plates with melted snow. You have family back east, just William now. Our parents passed years ago. Georgiana dried a plate with a scrap of cloth. He has a banking position in Boston. Says he can find me suitable employment as a companion or governess. Is that what you want? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in so long. It's what's sensible. A woman alone can't survive out here. Quinn's eyes held hers. Some do. Well, I'm not some frontier Amazon who can shoot wolves and plow fields single-handedly, she snapped, sudden frustration welling up. I'm tired, Mr. Blackwood, tired of fighting the land and the weather and the loneliness every single day. I understand loneliness, he said quietly. Georgiana looked away, embarrassed by her outburst. Yes, I suppose you do. His large hand hesitantly touched her shoulder, the briefest contact before withdrawing. There's no shame in seeking a different path, Mrs. Parker. The frontier isn't for everyone. The gentleness in his voice almost undid her. She blinked rapidly, determined not to cry in front of this man. Thank you for understanding. That evening they sat closer to the stove than the night before, the temperature having dropped further. Quinn whittled a piece of wood with practiced strokes while Georgiana darned a pair of woolen socks. What are you making? She asked, nodding toward his hands. Quinn held up the emerging shape, a small horse, its lines elegant despite the simple tools. Just passing time. Used to make them for Emma. The mention of his daughter hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of loss. It's beautiful, Georgiana said softly. You have an artist's hands. He looked at his large, calloused palms as if seeing them for the first time. Never thought of them that way. Well, they are. She returned to her darning, aware of a subtle shift between them, the acknowledgement of something beyond mere survival bringing them together in this storm-besieged barn. When they settled into their bedrolls that night, they were closer than before, not inappropriately so, but near enough that Georgiana could hear Quinn's steady breathing in the darkness. It was comforting in a way she hadn't expected, this reminder of another human presence after months of sleeping alone in an empty house. Georgiana, Quinn's voice came softly through the darkness, the first time he'd used her given name. If you don't mind me asking, do you hate it here because of the land itself, or because it reminds you of what you've lost? The question pierced straight to a truth she'd been avoiding. Both, I think, and neither. She sighed. When Thomas was alive, this place was his dream, not mine. I was simply accompanying him on his adventure. After he died, it became my burden. I never chose it for myself. And if you could choose now, without the weight of his dreams or your grief, Georgiana stared into the darkness, considering. I don't know. I've never allowed myself to think that way. Perhaps you should, Quinn said gently. Dreams can change. New ones can grow where old ones withered. His words followed her into sleep, opening possibilities she hadn't permitted herself to imagine. The third morning of the blizzard brought a subtle change in the quality of the light filtering through the barn's small windows. The howling wind had diminished to a steady moan, and the constant assault of snow against the walls had lessened. "Storm's breaking," Quinn announced after stepping outside briefly. "Another day, maybe less, and the trails will be passable." Georgiana felt an unexpected pang at his words. Soon this interlude would end, and Quinn Blackwood would ride away on his Appaloosa back to his mountain solitude. "Your horse seems better," she observed, watching as the animal put weight on its injured leg. "Thanks to your thread and needle." Quinn checked the stitches carefully. "And a warm place to heal." They worked together one last time, clearing paths to the house and livestock pens, the physical labor a welcome distraction from the impending farewell. The sky above was clearing to a crystalline blue, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Quinn said, pausing to catch his breath, his gaze sweeping across the plains to the distant mountains. Georgiana followed his look. For the first time in months, she saw the land not as her prison but simply as itself wild and challenging, yes, but also breathtaking in its vastness. "Yes," she admitted, "it is." That evening, their last together, carried a bittersweet quality. They shared the remainder of their supplies, talking long into the night about everything and nothing, books they'd read, places they'd seen, small moments that had shaped their lives. "What will you do when you return to your cabin?" Georgiana asked as the fire burned low. Quinn considered the question. "Check my trap lines, prepare for spring hunting parties. The usual." "Alone," he nodded, "as I have been, doesn't it, wear on you the solitude?" His eyes met hers across the dying fire. "It did, less so now." "Why?" "Because I remembered something these past few days." He set aside his coffee cup. "What it's like to connect with another person, to be understood." Georgiana's heart quickened. "Quinn, I'm not presuming anything," he said quickly, "just speaking truth. You reminded me there's more to life than just surviving." She looked down at her hands. "You did the same for me." The silence between them was charged with unspoken possibilities. "If you want," Quinn said carefully, "when the weather clears completely, I could help you get the farm ready to sell, before your brother arrives." "You would do that?" "I would." His gaze was steady. Or, Georgiana prompted when he didn't continue. Quinn took a deep breath. "Or I could show you another way to see this land, not as Thomas's failed dream or your burden, but as something new, something that could be yours if you wanted it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying choices exist that you might not have considered." He leaned forward, intensity in his eyes. "You don't have to leave if you don't want to, and you don't have to stay alone if you don't want that either." Georgiana's breath caught. "Are you offering friendship for now?" His voice was gentle but firm. "Time to decide what you truly want, nothing more, nothing less." Relief mingled with something like disappointment in Georgiana's chest. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything tonight." Quinn stood, moving to add wood to the stove. "Just think about it. Dreams can change, remember." That night, Georgiana lay awake long after Quinn's breathing had deepened into sleep. His words echoed in her mind, offering a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine, one where she chose her own path, instead of following the course laid out by Thomas or her brother. Could she stay? Learn to love this wild country on her own terms. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. And Quinn Blackwood, what place might he have in such a future? This man who had forced his way into her barn and somehow passed the defenses around her heart as well. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm finally spent. Quinn prepared to leave after breakfast, checking his horse's leg one final time. "She'll be fine," he pronounced, patting the Appaloosa's neck. "Thanks to your hospitality." Georgiana stood in the barn doorway, arms crossed against both the cold and the emptiness spreading in her chest. "Safe travels, then." Quinn secured his saddlebags, then turned to her. "Have you thought about what I said?" "I have." She met his gaze steadily. "I'd like that time you offered to decide what I want." A smile, the first full one she'd seen, transformed his weathered face. "Then I'll return in 2 weeks if that suits you. Help with whatever needs doing, regardless of your decision." 2 weeks, she agreed. Quinn mounted his horse, looking down at her from the saddle. "Georgiana Parker, thank you for not shooting me that first night." A laugh escaped her, bright in the winter air. "You're welcome, Quinn Blackwood. Thank you for forcing your way into my barn." With a tip of his hat, he rode out into the snow-covered landscape, the sun turning his figure into a silhouette against the brilliant white. Georgiana watched until he disappeared, her hand pressed against her heart, which felt lighter than it had in months. Whatever she decided about her future, she knew with sudden clarity that the widow who had raised a gun in fear 3 days ago was already transforming into someone new, someone stronger, someone who might yet find joy in this wild, beautiful land. The 2 weeks that followed Quinn's departure were a revelation for Georgiana. For the first time since Thomas's death, she found herself considering the farm not as a burden to endure until escape was possible, but as a place with potential, her potential. She took inventory of the property with fresh eyes. 20 acres of decent grazing land, a solid if modest house, a barn that needed repairs but would stand for years with proper care. The cattle were few but healthy, and the chicken coop provided eggs enough for her needs with some to trade in town. It wasn't the cattle empire Thomas had dreamed of, but perhaps it could be something else entirely. On the 3rd day after Quinn left, Georgiana rode into the small settlement of Whitefish Creek, 5 miles from her homestead. The general store was warm and crowded, neighbors exchanging stories of the blizzard's aftermath. Mrs. Parker, Martha Jenkins, the storekeeper's wife, greeted her with surprise. "We were worried about you, all alone out there during that terrible storm." "I managed," Georgiana said, not ready to explain Quinn's presence, "though I'm running low on supplies." As she gathered flour, coffee, and other necessities, Georgiana found herself lingering by the seed display. Spring planting was months away, but the colorful packets caught her eye. Vegetables, yes, but also flowers. Hollyhocks, sweet williams, bachelor's buttons. On impulse, she added several packets to her purchases. "Planning a garden come spring?" Martha asked as she tallied the bill. "Yes," Georgiana replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I think I am." Martha beamed. "That's wonderful. I was beginning to fear." "Well, with all the talk of you returning east." "Nothing's decided," Georgiana said carefully, "but I'm considering my options." "Well, I for one hope you stay." Martha leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between us, this town could use more educated women with opinions of their own. Too many men and not enough civilization, if you ask me." Georgiana smiled, warmed by the unexpected support. "I'll keep that in mind." On her way out, she paused by the community notice board. Among announcements for church socials and cattle sales, a particular notice caught her eye. Teacher needed Whitefish Creek School spring term beginning March 1879. Inquire with town council. Georgiana stared at the notice, Quinn's words echoing in her mind. Dreams can change. New ones can grow where old ones withered. She had been educated in one of Philadelphia's finest ladies' academies. Before marrying Thomas, she'd considered teaching. Was it possible that here, in this frontier town, she might find a way to combine her past dreams with her present life? The ride home was cold but bright, the sun glinting off snow-covered fields. For the first time in months, Georgiana found herself making plans that extended beyond mere survival or escape. That evening, she wrote a letter to her brother William, carefully explaining that she was reconsidering her decision to return east. She made no mention of Quinn Blackwood, focusing instead on her growing sense that she might find purpose here if given the chance to choose it for herself. The days passed quickly after that. Georgiana threw herself into improving the homestead not for sale, but for herself. She repaired what she could, made lists of supplies needed for larger projects, and even cleaned out Thomas's clothing, finally accepting that he wouldn't return to claim them. It was while sorting through his desk that she found the deed to their property solely in Thomas's name, now transferable to her as his widow. The sight of the document sparked a realization. This land could truly be hers, not a husband's dream or a burden to bear, but her own choice, her own future. A week and a half after Quinn's departure, Georgiana rode back to Whitefish Creek, this time with a specific purpose. She marched directly to the town council office, deed in hand and determination in her step. Mrs. Parker, Councilman Edwards greeted her with surprise. "What brings you to town on such a cold day?" "Two matters of business, Mr. Edwards." Georgiana removed her gloves, setting them precisely on his desk. "First, I need to ensure the deed to my property is properly transferred to my name." Edwards blinked. Of course, that's a simple matter. And the second? I wish to apply for the teaching position at the school." She held his gaze steadily. "I am well qualified, having been educated at the Winthrop Academy for Young Ladies in Philadelphia. I can provide references if necessary." The councilman's eyebrows rose. "You're staying in Whitefish Creek, then? We'd heard you planned to return east come spring." "Plans change, Mr. Edwards." Georgiana smiled slightly. "I've discovered I may have more to offer and receive from this community than I previously believed." Edwards studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "The school board meets next Wednesday. I'll arrange for you to present your qualifications then." He hesitated. "Though I should warn you, Mrs. Parker, the position pays little, and managing both a farm and a classroom would be challenging for anyone, let alone a woman alone," Georgiana finished for him. "Yes, I'm aware of the challenges, but I believe I'm equal to them." As she left the council office, deed now properly in her name and an appointment with the school board secured, Georgiana felt a surge of confidence unlike anything she'd experienced since arriving in Montana territory. For the first time, she was making choices not because they were expected or necessary, but because they reflected who she wanted to become. The day Quinn was due to return dawned clear and cold. Georgiana found herself watching the horizon more often than she'd care to admit, anticipation fluttering in her stomach like nervous birds. What would he think of her decisions? Of her tentative plans for a future here rather than back east? And more importantly, what role, if any, might he play in that future? By mid-afternoon, with no sign of him, Georgiana forced herself to focus on practical tasks. She was in the chicken coop, collecting eggs, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Heart suddenly racing, she stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the winter sun. Quinn Blackwood sat atop his Appaloosa, silhouetted against the sky just as he had been when he rode away. But this time, there was no storm raging, no desperation driving him to her door, only a choice to return. "Afternoon, Mrs. Parker," he called, dismounting with the easy grace of a man accustomed to living in the saddle. Mr. Blackwood. Georgiana set down her basket of eggs, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. Right on time. He approached, leading his horse, and Georgiana was struck anew by his size, not just his height and breadth, but the way he seemed to fill the space around him with his presence. "Your farm looks good," he observed, glancing around. "You've been busy." "Very." She gestured toward the barn. "Please get your horse settled. Then perhaps you join me for coffee. I have matters I'd like to discuss." Quinn's eyes, blue as the winter sky above them, studied her face. "Good matters or bad?" Georgiana allowed herself a small smile. "Hopeful ones, I think." Relief visibly eased the tension in his shoulders. "I'll be right in." Waiting for him in her kitchen, freshly swept, curtains washed, a fire crackling in the stove, Georgiana felt a curious blend of nervousness and certainty. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time since Thomas's death, it felt like hers to choose. When Quinn entered, removing his hat and coat, Georgiana was struck by how right he looked there, this mountain man with professor's eyes and gentle hands, standing in her kitchen as if he belonged. "Coffee smells good," he said, accepting the cup she offered. "Sit, please." Georgiana gestured to the table, taking a seat across from him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choices and dreams changing." Quinn nodded, waiting. "I've decided to stay," she said simply. "At least for now. I've applied to teach at the school in Whitefish Creek, and I'm making plans for spring planting." The smile that spread across Quinn's face transformed his weathered features. "That's good news, Georgiana. Real good news. It's not decided yet, the teaching position, I mean. But even if that doesn't come through, I've realized something." She met his gaze directly. "This place doesn't have to be Thomas's failed dream. It can be my beginning." "Yes," Quinn said softly. "That's what I hoped you'd see." Georgiana took a deep breath. "You offered friendship when you left." "Is that still what you're offering, Quinn Blackwood?" He set down his coffee cup, his expression turning serious. "I offered friendship because it seemed what you needed then, a space to breathe, to decide. But if you're asking what I hope for—" He hesitated, then continued with careful honesty. "I hope for more in time, if you're willing." "More," she repeated, the word hanging between them, full of possibility. "I live simply," Quinn said, his deep voice rumbling in the quiet kitchen. "My cabin is small, my means modest, but I've been thinking too these past 2 weeks about changes. About dreams." "What have you been thinking?" Georgiana's heart beat faster. "That maybe 15 years in the high country is enough. That maybe there's a middle path, not the isolation of the mountains or the crowds of the cities, but something in between." His eyes held hers. "A place where a man might find community when he wants it, solitude when he needs it. A place not far from here." "Whitefish Creek," Georgiana said, understanding dawning. Quinn nodded. "There's land available along Pine Creek, 10 miles east. Good water, good timber. Close enough to town and to you, but with mountains still in view." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking for promises, Georgiana, just possibility." "Possibility," she echoed, the word tasting of hope on her tongue. "Yes. A chance to see if what began in a blizzard might grow in fair weather too." His large hand moved across the table, stopping just short of hers. "If you're willing." Georgiana looked at his outstretched hand, calloused from years of hard work, capable of both strength and surprising gentleness. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her own hand in his. "I'm willing," she said softly. The touch of their hands, simple as it was, seemed to seal something between them, not a promise of forever, not yet, but an opening. A beginning. "I could stay," Quinn offered. "Help with the repairs you've been planning. There's no rush back to the mountains now." Georgiana smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I'd like that." As winter gave way to spring, Quinn became a regular presence at Georgiana's farm. He would stay for days or sometimes weeks, helping with repairs and spring planting, then return to his mountain cabin to check trap lines or guide the occasional hunting party. The rhythm suited them both, independence preserved while connection grew stronger. Georgiana secured the teaching position at Whitefish Creek's small schoolhouse, riding into town 3 days a week to instruct 20 children of varying ages and abilities. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, reconnecting her to the educated woman she had been before frontier life narrowed her world. By April, Quinn had purchased the land he'd spoken of along Pine Creek and begun building a modest cabin there. Georgiana visited the site one golden afternoon, watching as he set logs into place with methodical precision. "It's beautiful here," she observed, looking out over the creek to where mountains rose in the distance. "You can still see your beloved peaks." Quinn straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "But I can see the valley too, and the town." He glanced at her. "And it's an easy ride to a certain schoolteacher's farm." Georgiana smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. Over the past months, their relationship had deepened slowly. Carefully shared meals and conversations, occasional touches that lingered longer each time, but always with respect for the grief they both still carried. "When will it be finished?" she asked, running her hand along a smooth-hewn log. "June, if the weather holds." Quinn came to stand beside her. "Would you like to see the inside?" He led her through the partially constructed building, pointing out where each room would be a main living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with windows facing east to catch the morning light, 2 bedrooms. "Two?" Georgiana asked, something fluttering in her stomach. Quinn met her gaze steadily. "One for me, one for possibilities." The word hung between them, rich with meaning. "Quinn," Georgiana said softly, "are you building this cabin for yourself or for something more?" He took her hands in his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I'm building it for hope, Georgiana, for a future I couldn't imagine before I forced my way into your barn that night." "And what future is that?" she asked, though she knew the answer in her heart. "One where I don't face the mountains alone anymore, where the solitude is chosen, not imposed." His voice deepened. "One where, perhaps, a certain strong-willed widow might consider joining her life with mine when she's ready." Georgiana's breath caught. It wasn't quite a proposal, but a door opening to one when the time was right. "I think," she said carefully, "that widow might be closer to ready than either of us expected." Joy brightened Quinn's eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her their first kiss, tasting of sunshine and promise and new beginnings. When they parted, Georgiana kept her arms around his waist, unwilling to break the connection. "I never imagined when I aimed that rifle at you that you'd become so important to me." Quinn chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her cheek. "I'm grateful your aim wasn't as steady as your courage." "As am I," she whispered. "As am I." The following weeks passed in a sweet haze of work and growing closeness. Georgiana's farm flourished under their combined efforts, vegetable gardens planted, fences mended, the house freshened with new paint, and the flower seeds she'd impulsively purchased months before. Quinn's cabin took shape rapidly, and word spread through Whitefish Creek about the mountain man who was settling in their midst and his frequent visits to the schoolteacher's farm. "People are talking," Georgiana mentioned one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and pink. Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Does that trouble you?" "No," she realized with some surprise. "It doesn't." "Good." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Because I was thinking it might be time to give them something more substantial to talk about." Before Georgiana could respond, Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Hand-carved, she realized, with delicate wildflowers etched into its surface. "I made this," he said, offering it to her. "Open it." With slightly trembling fingers, Georgiana lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a ring, a simple gold band with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," Quinn explained softly. "She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for when I found the right woman to give it to." Georgiana stared at the ring, then at Quinn's face, open, vulnerable, hopeful. "Are you asking me to marry you, Quinn Blackwood?" she whispered. He nodded, taking the ring from its box. "I am. I love you, Georgiana Parker. You brought me back to life when I thought that part of me was gone forever." Tears filled her eyes. "And you showed me I could build a new dream when I thought all dreams were finished. Is that a yes?" Quinn asked, a smile beginning to curve his lips. Instead of answering, Georgiana leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her newfound hope and happiness into the connection between them. "Yes," she murmured against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger where it caught the last rays of the setting sun. When your cabin is finished," Georgiana decided. "A new home for our new beginning." They were married on a perfect June day, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the mountains standing witness in the distance. The ceremony took place at Quinn's newly completed cabin, with the entire population of Whitefish Creek in attendance, Georgiana's students throwing flower petals, Martha Jenkins providing a wedding cake, and Councilman Edwards officiating with evident pleasure. William had traveled from Boston for the occasion, initially skeptical of his sister's frontier marriage but won over by Quinn's quiet intelligence and obvious devotion to Georgiana. "He's not what I expected," William admitted the night before the wedding. "When you wrote about a mountain man, I imagined someone quite different." Georgiana smiled, remembering her own first impression of Quinn. "He surprised me too, still does every day." After the ceremony, as guests celebrated with food and music, Quinn led Georgiana away from the crowd, down to the creek that gave their new home its name. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind as they watched the water flow past. "More than I ever thought possible," Georgiana leaned back against his chest. "A year ago I was just surviving. Now I'm living again." Quinn turned her in his arms, his blue eyes serious. "I want you to know something. This land, this home, it's ours together. Not my dream you're following, but something we're building together." "I know." Georgiana touched his face, understanding the importance of his words. "That's why it will succeed where Thomas's dream couldn't, because we share it equally." Their kiss was a promise, sealed with the sound of flowing water and distant laughter from their wedding guests. Life settled into new patterns after the wedding. Georgiana continued teaching, her classroom growing as more families moved into the area. Quinn established himself as a guide for hunting parties in the warmer months, but stayed closer to home than he once had, helping Georgiana maintain her farm and their new cabin. They decided to keep both properties, the farm as a source of income and connection to the community, the cabin as their primary home and a retreat from the demands of society when solitude called. Winter came again, but this time, Georgiana faced it without dread. Their cabin was warm and well-stocked, and the woman who had once feared the isolation of frontier life found herself appreciating the quiet months with her husband, reading by the fire or listening to Quinn's stories of his years in the mountains. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, a light snow fell outside their cabin windows. Quinn presented Georgiana with a gift, a small wooden carving of a barn with two figures standing in its doorway. "To remember how we began," he said as she traced the delicate details with her fingertips. As if I could forget, Georgiana smiled, setting the carving on the mantel. You forcing your way into my barn, me nearly shooting you where you stood. Best thing that ever happened to me, that storm. Quinn pulled her into his arms, brought me the most precious gift of my life. And to think I almost chased you back into the blizzard, Georgiana teased, resting her head against his chest. You were formidable with that rifle, Quinn chuckled. Still are. Only when necessary. She looked up at him, suddenly serious. I need to tell you something. Quinn's expression grew concerned. What is it? Taking his hand, Georgiana placed it gently against her stomach, still flat but harboring their secret. Come July, we'll need that second bedroom you built for possibilities. Understanding dawned on Quinn's face, followed by a joy so profound it transformed his features. A child? You're certain? Georgiana nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. Quinn lifted her in a gentle embrace, his laughter mingling with her own. When he set her down, there were tears in his eyes. I never thought I'd have this chance again, he whispered, after Emma. I know, Georgiana touched his face. I was afraid too after losing Thomas, afraid to hope to love again. And now? She smiled, all the love she felt shining in her face. Now I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. As night fell and snow continued to drift past their windows, Georgiana and Quinn sat before their fire, planning and dreaming of the future their child would have in this wild, beautiful land they'd both chosen not out of necessity or circumstance, but out of love for each other and the life they were building together. The mountain man who had forced his way into a widow's barn during a blizzard had found far more than shelter from a storm. He had found his way home. And the widow who had raised a gun, then frozen at the sight of a stranger, had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected intrusions can lead to the greatest joys. When summer came and their daughter was born healthy and strong with her father's blue eyes, they named her Hope, for the emotion that had brought them together and the future that stretched before them, as vast and promising as the Montana sky.